Between 1936 and 1952, Francisco Franco and 34 of his top generals orchestrated the execution of roughly 150,000 civilians in Spain. When Franco finally died in his bed in 1975, the rest of the world naturally expected a reckoning. And why wouldn't they? Look at what happened to the rest of fascist Europe. Nuremberg had just sentenced 12 Nazi leaders to death, laying bare the horrors of the Holocaust. Germany eventually carried out thousands of sentences against regime criminals, forcing a painful but necessary national awakening. Italy literally hung Benito Mussolini and his mistress upside down from a girder in a Milan square, a brutal public exclamation mark at the end of a dark era. But in Spain, something unprecedented happened, something that completely defies everything we think we know about international justice, international law, and human rights. Every single one of Franco's 34 generals escaped prosecution. Not a single trial, not a day in prison. They didn't even have to answer questions in a courtroom. Instead, the architects of a massive, decades-long state terror campaign simply retired to their luxury country estates, collected their hefty government pensions, and died peacefully, surrounded by their families. To understand the sheer scale of what these men got away with, you have to look at how deeply they entrenched themselves into the very fabric of Spanish society. Franco didn't just win a brutal 3-year civil war in 1939. He locked down the entire country for the next 36 years. That is one of the longest, most absolute military dictatorships in modern European history. For nearly 4 decades, his inner circle of generals controlled everything: the army, the courts, the police, the schools, and even the Catholic Church. If you opposed them, you were either executed, imprisoned, or forced to flee. 500,000 Spaniards vanished into exile, scattering across Europe and Latin America. Entire villages were emptied of their people. Entire political, cultural, and regional traditions were systematically rooted out. And the worst part? The killing didn't stop when the war ended. If you dig into the data from the world's leading historians, people like Paul Preston or Anthony Beevor, the numbers are staggering. We aren't talking about rogue soldiers committing random atrocities in the chaos of battle. This was a cold, bureaucratic killing machine managed directly from the top. To see how this machine operated, you only have to look at the men who ran it. Generals like Gonzalo Capo de Llano, who controlled the south of Spain. He used the radio as a psychological weapon, broadcasting terrifying warnings to civilians, openly promising that his troops would hunt down and rape the wives and daughters of anyone supporting the Republic. And it wasn't an empty threat. When his forces took Seville, they slaughtered thousands of workers in cold blood. Then there was General Juan Yagüe, notoriously known as the Butcher of Badajoz. After capturing the city of Badajoz near the Portuguese border, Yagüe ordered thousands of prisoners, including women and teenagers, to be herded into the local bull ring. Machine guns were set up in the stands, and the prisoners were systematically mowed down. When a French journalist later asked Yagüe why he didn't just capture them, the general calmly replied, "Of course we shot them. Did you expect me to take 4,000 Reds with me as my column advanced, racing against time? Was I supposed to let them make my rear guard insecure?" During the war years alone, conservative estimates place these civilian executions at over 130,000. But when Franco declared victory in April 1939, the firing squads kept working. Historians argue that another 20,000 to 50,000 people were executed in the immediate post-war years. In overcrowded, filthy prisons, systematic starvation and typhus took tens of thousands more. Military tribunals processed defendants in minutes, without defense lawyers, without evidence, and without the right to appeal. Death certificates were signed with chilling assembly line precision. The 34 generals at the apex of this structure knew exactly whose names were on those lists. But the terror wasn't just physical, it was social and psychological. Under the guise of a rigid ideology called Nacionalcatolicismo, the regime sought to purify the Spanish gene pool. Doctors like Antonio Vallejo Nájera, Franco's chief military psychiatrist, argued that Marxism was a mental disease, a red gene that could be eradicated. This pseudo-scientific madness led to one of the darkest secrets of the regime, the stolen babies. Tens of thousands of newborns were taken from Republican mothers in prisons or hospitals, told their babies had died, and handed over to wealthy, regime-loyal families. It was a cultural and genetic cleansing that tore families apart for generations. So, how does a country transition into a modern, wealthy democracy while the men who signed those death warrants and stole those children are still walking the streets? They signed a deal. When Franco died in 1975, the country was paralyzed by an unspoken, suffocating fear. The memory of the Civil War was still so raw, and the military was still so powerful, that the public desperately wanted to avoid another bloodbath at all costs. In October 1977, Spain's newly elected parliament passed what is known as the Amnesty Law. Today, historians call it the Pacto del Olvido, the Pact of Forgetting. It did release political prisoners, yes, which is why the public celebrated it at the time. But it included a massive hidden catch. It explicitly shielded every single Francoist official, soldier, and policeman from criminal prosecution for any act committed before 1976. With one single vote, the architects of 150,000 deaths became legally untouchable. There were no truth commissions like in South Africa, no public hearings, no justice, and no institutional shame. Instead of retiring in disgrace, the generals kept their ranks, their medals, and their prestige. Many stayed in active command of the Spanish military well into the 1980s, drawing full salaries from the very democracy they had spent their entire lives trying to crush. And if you think they suddenly became peaceful Democrats overnight, think again. On February 23, 1981, the ghost of the old regime came roaring back. Lieutenant Colonel Antonio Tejero stormed the Spanish parliament, firing his pistol into the ceiling during a live broadcast, taking the entire government hostage. Behind the scenes, old guard Francoist generals were waiting in the wings, ready to mobilize tanks and seize control of the country. The coup collapsed within 18 hours, largely because King Juan Carlos refused to support it. But it proved a terrifying point. The perpetrators hadn't reformed. They hadn't repented. They were just waiting. For over 30 years, a heavy, state-sponsored silence hung over Spain. Children grew up not knowing how their grandfathers died, and families whispered about the past only behind closed doors. Until 2008, when one judge decided he had seen enough. Investigating magistrate Baltasar Garzón did the unthinkable. He officially named Francisco Franco and his 34 generals in a criminal court ruling, labeling them part of an organized criminal structure responsible for crimes against humanity. Garzón ordered investigations into 114,000 forced disappearances, the grandfathers, mothers, and children buried in unmarked mass graves across the Spanish countryside. He ordered exhumations, attempting to give families the right to finally bury their dead. For a brief moment, it looked like justice was finally arriving, but it was a phantom victory. By 2008, almost every single one of those 34 generals was already dead. The few left alive were frail, retired, and completely out of reach. But here's the real tragedy. In 2012, Spain's Supreme Court put Judge Garzón himself on trial for violating the 1977 amnesty law by opening the investigation. He was disbarred, his judicial career ruined. The only man who tried to legally hold the regime accountable became the only person to face professional and legal ruin in democratic Spain. Spain eventually passed memory laws in 2007 and 2022 to remove Francoist statues, rename streets, and fund the digging up of mass graves. But you can't prosecute a ghost. The brutal fate of Franco's generals? There wasn't one. They outlived justice itself. They died with their medals on their chests, their pensions in the bank, and full military honors, while the bodies of their victims still lie in unmarked pits beneath the Spanish soil, making Spain the country with the second highest number of mass graves in the world, surpassed only by Cambodia. In the end, The cruelest verdict of history isn't what Spain's courts did to these men. It's what they refused to do. If you want to see how the rest of fascist Europe's inner circles actually met their reckoning, click on our breakdown of the chaotic final days of Mussolini's command staff right here.